The abyssal reach. The weight of the world, the descent into nothingness. The elevator ride to the bottom of the world takes 4 hours. For Elias Thorne, those 4 hours felt like a slow crawl into a coffin. He sat on a small metal bench inside the Acheron 1 descent module, watching the digital depth gauge flicker. 2,000 meters, 3,000 meters, 5,000 meters. Outside the thick, reinforced porthole, the ocean had long since lost its color. First, the bright turquoise faded into a deep, bruised purple. Then came the midnight zone where the sun is just a memory. Now, at 7,000 meters, there was only the void. Elias wiped sweat from his forehead. The air inside the pod was cold, smelling of ozone and recycled breath. He was a deep-sea structural engineer, sent to the Hadal 7 station because the previous engineer had stopped communicating. Pathfinder to Hadal 7. Do you copy? Elias spoke into his headset. Static. A long, screeching hiss that sounded like someone dragging a fingernail across a chalkboard. Then, a voice broke through. It was distorted, bubbling, as if the person speaking had their mouth full of water. Down, come down. It's quiet here. Elias frowned. Hadal 7, is that you, Miller? Your comms are breaking up. I'm 10 minutes out from the docking bay. The voice didn't respond with words. Instead, Elias heard a wet, rhythmic thumping. Thud, thud, thud. It sounded like a heavy heart beating against the side of the station, the Bone City. As the pod reached 10,000 meters, Elias switched on the external floodlights. The beams of light cut through the marine snow, the decaying remains of fish and plants falling from the surface. My God, Elias whispered. He wasn't looking at a flat seafloor. Below him lay a graveyard of giants. Massive, white, rib-like structures, each the size of a 5-story building, protruded from the silt. They weren't made of rock. They looked like calcified bone. They formed a long, winding tunnel that led directly to the Hadal 7 research station. The station itself looked like a cluster of silver bubbles clinging to the side of a trench. But something was wrong. Half of the exterior lights were flickering. The long umbilical pipe that supplied oxygen from the surface was twisted, spiraling like a dying snake. Elias steered the pod toward Docking Bay 3. As the mechanical arms of the station grabbed his pod, he felt a massive vibration. It wasn't the machinery. It felt like something had bitten the station. Crunch. The pod shuddered. A warning light flashed red. External hull compromised. Docking complete, the computer voice chimed, blissfully unaware of the danger. Elias grabbed his gear and stepped into the airlock. The transition was silent. When the inner door opened, he expected to be greeted by the station crew. Instead, he was greeted by the smell. It was the smell of a beach where things had been rotting in the sun for weeks. But there was no sun here. There was only the hum of the ventilation and the sound of water dripping somewhere. The hallway of shadows. The lights in the main corridor were dimmed to an eerie emergency red. Elias pulled his heavy flashlight from his belt and clicked it on. The floor was covered in a thick, translucent slime. It looked like jellyfish remains, but it was pulsing. When Elias stepped on it, the slime glowed with a faint, angry orange light. Miller? Sarah? Is anyone here? His voice echoed down the long metal tube of the hallway. Here, here, here. He walked toward the common room. On the walls he saw handprints. Not dirty handprints, but handprints made of burned skin, as if someone had touched the freezing cold metal with hands that were boiling hot. He reached the heavy steel door of the common room. It was dented from the inside. Something had tried to get out. Elias pushed the door open. His flashlight beam swept across the room. The dining table was set. 3 plates of half-eaten pasta sat there. The steam was still rising from the bowls, but the chairs were empty. Then, Elias's light hit the corner of the room. There stood Sarah, the biologist. Her back was turned to him. She was staring at the wall, her forehead pressed against the cold metal. Sarah? Thank God. What happened? Where is everyone? Sarah didn't move. She didn't speak. Elias walked closer, reaching out to touch her shoulder. Sarah, talk to me. As his hand touched her lab coat, Sarah's head didn't turn. It rotated. Her neck snapped with the sound of breaking dry branches as her face turned 180 degrees. The chorus of voices drifted from her throat. The air here is a lie. The pressure is the only truth. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died. Total, absolute darkness swallowed the room. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. He could hear his own ragged breathing, and then another sound. Slap, squish, slap. The sound of bare, wet feet walking on metal. But the footsteps weren't coming from where Sarah stood. They were coming from the ceiling. Elias fumbled for his flashlight, his fingers slick with cold sweat. He clicked the switch. Nothing. He smacked the side of the casing. The beam cut through the dark, flickering weakly. He shined it upward. Sarah, or the thing that was Sarah, was no longer by the wall. She was crouched in the corner of the ceiling, like a massive, pale spider. Her limbs had elongated, the joints bending in directions that would have turned human bones to dust. Her lab coat was shredded, revealing skin that had turned translucent and gray. Her scalp taut and stretched to look at him, while her body remained facing the wall. Her eyes were gone. In their place were two pulsating black holes, and from her mouth, a thin, needle-like tongue flicked out, tasting the air. "The water is inside us now, Elias," she said. Her voice wasn't her own. It was a chorus of 100 different voices, all screaming at once. The sound of snapping bone. Elias stumbled back, his heavy boots skidding on the bioluminescent slime coating the floor. The sound of Sarah's neck snapping, that dry, splintering crack, echoed in the small room, louder than the hum of the station's engines. "Sarah, stop," Elias whispered, his voice trembling. The entity that wore Sarah's skin didn't move its body. It remained pinned against the wall, but its head, twisted backward, began to twitch. The black holes where her eyes should have been started to leak, not blood, but a thick, pressurized seawater mixed with black silt. "Why do you breathe so fast, Elias?" Pulsating with the rhythm of the ocean's weight. She dropped. Elias lunged to the side just as she slammed into the dining table. The heavy metal table buckled under her weight. She didn't scream, she hissed, a sound like steam escaping a broken pipe. Elias scrambled for the door, but the slime on the floor was getting deeper. It wasn't just slime anymore, the station was leaking. A thin, high-pitched whistle filled the air as a hairline fracture appeared in the corner of the room. A jet of water, pressurized to 10,000 meters, shot out like a laser, slicing through a metal chair as if it were butter. "Computer, seal the common room," Elias screamed. "Access denied," the calm female AI voice replied. "Biological signatures detected. Quarantine protocol overridden by the guest." "The guest?" Elias choked out, reaching the door. "What guest?" He slammed his hand against the manual override lever. The heavy steel door began to slide shut, but a gray, elongated hand shot out, grabbing the edge of the door. The strength was impossible. The steel began to groan and bend under the creature's grip. "The records of the dead." Elias kicked the hand with all his might and pulled the emergency release. The door hissed shut with a deafening thud, severing 3 of the creature's translucent fingers. They lay on the floor, twitching like dying fish, before dissolving into black ink. Elias didn't wait. He ran. He didn't go toward the docking bay. The path was flooded. He headed for the data vault, the most reinforced part of the station. If Miller had left anything behind, it would be there. The hallways were changing. The walls were no longer smooth silver. They were becoming encrusted with black salt and sharp, jagged barnacles that grew in seconds. The station was being digested by the trench. He reached the vault and slammed the code into the keypad. The door hissed open, and he dove inside, sealing it behind him. The vault was silent. It was a small, circular room filled with server racks and a single terminal. On the desk sat Miller's pipe and a cracked tablet. Elias picked up the tablet. It was covered in dried blood. He wiped the screen and hit play on the last recorded video memo. Miller's face appeared. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. His eyes were bloodshot, and he was staring at something off camera. "Entry 84, Miller's voice was a ragged whisper. "We were wrong. We thought the Bone City was a graveyard. It's not. It's a cage. We drilled into the seabed to find clean energy, but we didn't find heat. We found a nervous system. The entire trench, it's alive, Elias. It's one single conscious organism." Miller leaned closer to the camera, his face twisting in terror. It doesn't eat meat, it eats meaning. It takes your memories, your shape, your voice, and it uses them to lure more meaning down here. Sarah is gone. I saw her walk into the airlock without a sou. She didn't drown. She changed. If you're hearing this, Elias, don't look at their faces. If you look into their eyes, it can see into your mind. It will find the person you love most, and it will become them. Suddenly, in the video, a loud bang sounded behind Miller. He turned around, his eyes widening. "Oh no," Miller whispered. "Mom, is that you?" The video cut to static. Elias felt a cold shiver settle into his marrow. He looked at the security monitors in the vault. He saw the hallway outside. There, standing in front of the vault door, was no longer a spider-like Sarah. It was a young girl, maybe 6 years old. She was wearing a yellow raincoat and holding a tattered teddy bear. Elias's breath hitched. Lily? It was his daughter, the daughter who had drowned in a lake 3 years ago. She looked up at the camera and smiled. A row of needle-sharp teeth glinted in the red emergency light. "Daddy!" Her voice came through the vault's internal speakers, clear and sweet. "Why did you leave me in the water? It's so cold down here. Open the door, I want to show you what I found at the bottom. The ghost in the machine." Elias backed away from the monitor, his hands hitting the cold server racks. The girl in the yellow raincoat, the Lily on the screen, tilted her head. The movement was too smooth, lacking the friction of human muscle and bone. "You aren't her," Elias choked out, his voice cracking. "She died in the sunlight. You are just salt and shadows." The Lily thing didn't stop smiling. She began to hum a lullaby Elias used to sing to her. The sound didn't come from the speakers this time. It vibrated through the metal floor, rising up through the soles of his boots. It felt like the station itself was singing to him. "The vault is strong, Daddy," the voice whispered through the comms. "But the ocean is stronger. Don't you feel the weight? 10,000 meters of water, all wanting to be where you are." As if on cue, the vault's internal pressure alarm began to scream. Beep, beep, beep. A digital readout on the wall showed the external hull integrity, 22% and falling. The bone city outside was closing its ribs. The massive calcified structures were slowly crushing the Hadal 7 like a nut in a cracker. "Computer," Elias shouted, turning to the main terminal. "Is there a pressurized suit in this sector? A Mark IV exosuit?" "Searching," the AI replied. Her voice was flickering now, distorted by the static of the trench. "One Mark IV exosuit, located in the subdeck storage. Integrity, 89%. Note, oxygen scrubbers are offline. Estimated survival time in the abyss, 14 minutes. 14 minutes. To reach the escape pod at the other end of the station, he would have to walk outside, onto the seafloor, through the Bone City. Open the floor hatch to the subdeck," Elias commanded. "Warning," the AI responded. "Subdeck is currently experiencing Phase 2 flooding. The guest has entered the ventilation." Elias ignored the warning. He grabbed a heavy emergency axe from the wall and a flare gun. He had to choose. Die in this metal box as it collapsed, or face the thing wearing his daughter's face. He kicked the floor hatch open. A gust of freezing, misty air hit him. The subdeck was half submerged in that black, oily water. He climbed down the ladder, his heart thumping against his teeth. As his boots hit the freezing water, he heard it. Splash. Something was in the water with him. He shined his light across the dark surface. He saw the Mark IV exosuit, a massive, hulking suit of white titanium armor, standing at the end of the submerged walkway. It looked like a hollow ghost. But between him and the suit, something was rising from the black oil. It wasn't Lily, it wasn't Sarah, it was a collection of parts. He saw Miller's glasses embedded in a mass of translucent flesh. He saw a human ribcage being used as a jaw. The creature was a composite, a nightmare stitched together. From everything the trench had ever consumed, it didn't have eyes. It had sensors that looked like the cameras from the station's hallways. "Elias," the composite spoke, using Miller's voice. "Why go back to the surface? Up there you are just an engineer. Down here, you can be part of the archive. You will never be forgotten. You will be felt by the earth forever." The iron suit. Elias didn't answer. He fired the flare gun. The bright red magnesium light hissed through the air, hitting the composite in its center mass. The creature let out a sound that wasn't a scream. It was the sound of 1,000 glass bottles breaking at once. The black oil on its skin began to boil and retreat from the heat. "Stay back," Elias roared. He lunged for the exosuit. He scrambled into the open back of the massive armor, his fingers fumbling with the seal. The composite recovered quickly, its long, multi-jointed limbs slashing through the water toward him. Clang! A jagged claw slammed into the back of the suit just as the pressurized seal locked. Elias was inside. The internal HUD, heads-up display, flickered to life in front of his eyes. System start, pressure compensated. Oxygen 1358, hull shield active. Elias gripped the hydraulic controls. The massive metal fists of the suit clenched. Through the external microphones, he could hear the creature scratching at the titanium skin of the suit, its claws sounding like diamonds on glass. "My turn," Elias growled. He swung a massive hydraulic arm, catching the composite in its chest. The force of the titanium fist sent the creature flying back into the dark waters of the subdeck. But Elias knew he couldn't kill it. You can't kill the ocean. He turned toward the external airlock. "Computer, blow the emergency bolts on airlock 4. Manual override." "Elias, the pressure will..." "Do it." Boom! The explosive bolts fired. For a split second, there was a deafening roar as the vacuum of the deep sea met the air of the station. The wall of water hit the exosuit like a freight train, sent Elias spinning into the darkness. He was no longer in the station. He was falling, through the ribs of the bone city, into the mouth of the trench. The transition from the station to the open ocean is like falling from a skyscraper into a vat of liquid lead. The pressure doesn't just push, it screams against the titanium skin of the suit. To reach our 30,000-word goal, we will now explore the true, ancient scale of the Bone City as Elias walks the floor of the abyss. The heartbeat of the earth. Elias plummeted. The lights of the Hadal 7 station were now a small, flickering cluster of sparks far above him, looking like dying stars in a black sky. He was sinking into the true grave of the Atlantic. Depth, 10,800 meters. Oxygen, 1120. Thud. The exosuit hit the seafloor. A massive cloud of white silt exploded around him, obscuring the HUD. Elias sat in the dark, the only sound being the mechanical whirring of the suit's life support and the rapid, wet thudding of his own heart. "Steady," he whispered to himself. "Don't breathe so fast. Save the air." As the silt settled, Elias turned on the external floods. The beams of light didn't hit sand. They hit a floor of teeth. Thousands of them. Millions. Triangular, jagged, and as large as dinner plates, they covered the seafloor for as far as the light could reach. This wasn't a natural formation. This was a feeding ground. He looked up. The Bone City, those massive ribs he had seen from the pod, word scattered. Now that he was on the ground, he could see the perspective. They were perfectly aligned. He wasn't walking through a city. He was walking down a spine. The trench wasn't a crack in the earth's crust. It was a throat. Grumble. The ground beneath the suit vibrated. It was a low-frequency hum that made the metal of the suit sing. Hoo! Ha! Elias froze. He checked his internal sensors. The vibration was rhythmic, deep, slow. It's breathing, Elias realized. A cold wave of horror washing over him. The whole trench, it's not just a conscious organism. It's a single animal, and I'm standing on its tongue. The graveyard of echoes. Elias began to walk. Every step in the heavy exosuit felt like moving through wet cement. He had to find the emergency escape pod that had ejected from the station during the breach. According to his HUD, the pod's beacon was pinging about 400 meters ahead. As he trudged through the forest of ribs, he saw something that shouldn't be there. Submarines. Dozens of them. He saw the rusted, crushed hull of a German U-boat from World War II. Further down, a Cold War-era Soviet sub lay snapped in half like a toy. There were modern research vessels, fishing trawlers, and even ancient wooden galleons, all resting in the trench. Now, Elias pressed forward, his heart pounding, every step echoing in the silent, vast darkness. Their timbers preserved by the freezing, oxygen-poor water. They were all gathered here, huddled in the shadow of the ribs. Elias shined his light into the shattered cockpit of a nearby research sub. Inside, he saw a skeleton, but the bones weren't white. They were glowing with that same sickly orange slime he had seen in the station. As his light passed over the skeleton, its jaw moved. "Elias, help us." The voice came through his suit's external microphones. It was a radio signal, but it was coming from a dead man with no radio. "We are the archive." Another voice joined in, a woman's voice, French, perhaps from a crew lost decades ago. "We are the memories the great sleeper kept. Join us. Give us your fear. It is the only thing that keeps us warm." The submarines began to move, not under their own power, but being lifted by thick black tentacles of silt and oil rising from the seafloor. The graveyard was waking up. The composite creature from the station wasn't unique. It was just a scout. The entire graveyard was a single hungry mind. The red light in the dark. "Shut up. Get out of my head," Elias roared, toggling his comms to a closed loop. He ran. The hydraulic legs of the exosuit hissed and groaned, pushing the limits of their servos. Behind him, the rusted hulls of the old submarines were being dragged through the silt, following him like giant metallic predators. Up ahead, a bright rhythmic red light flashed, the escape pod. It was wedged between two massive teeth in the distance. Its emergency strobe was a beacon of hope in the nightmare. But as Elias got closer, he saw the problem. Standing on top of the pod was the Lily thing. She wasn't wearing the yellow raincoat anymore. Her skin had been stripped away, revealing a body made of pulsing translucent veins and bioluminescent nerves. She was 10 feet tall now, her limbs fused with the metal of the pod. "Daddy, look!" she shrieked, her voice echoing through the water, shattering the glass of a nearby wreck. "I found the way out, but the door is stuck. It needs a key." She held up a human skull. It was Miller's. "It needs a mind to power the engine, Daddy. Yours is so full of juicy, dark memories. Give it to me, and we can go home." Elias gripped the controls of the exosuit. He looked at the massive titanium claws of his suit, then at the nightmare wearing his daughter's voice. He had 6 minutes of air. He was 11 kilometers below the surface, and he was standing in the mouth of a god. The final bargain. Elias looked at the HUD. The numbers were bleeding away. Pressure warning, critical. The Lily entity stood atop the escape pod, her translucent limbs weaving into the very metal of the hull. She wasn't just a monster, she was a bridge. Through her, the trench was speaking. "You want my memories?" Elias's voice was a rasping growl inside the helmet. "You want the pain of losing her? Fine, take it. But you take it all." Elias didn't attack. He did something the creature didn't expect. He reached for the manual release of his own helmet. "Daddy, what are you doing?" The Lily thing tilted its head, the rows of needle teeth chattering. "The water will crush you. You will be flat before you can scream." "I'm not opening it to let the water in," Elias whispered, his fingers locking onto the emergency overload sequence of the Mark IV's neural link. "I'm opening my mind to let you in." In a deep sea suit, the neural link connects the pilot's brain directly to the suit's sensors. Elias bypassed the safety firewalls. He flooded the connection with every raw, agonizing memory of the car accident, the sound of the splashing lake, the coldness of his daughter's hand, and the years of hollow silence that followed. He didn't just share the memory, he weaponized the grief. The creature shrieked. It wasn't a sound of hunger anymore, it was a sound of agony. The trench, an ancient organism that had lived for millions of years in silent, cold peace, was suddenly flooded with the scorching, chaotic electrical fire of human trauma. The ribs of the bone city began to shake. The teeth on the seafloor cracked. The great sleeper was recoiling from the taste of human suffering, the ascent of the soul. The Lily entity began to dissolve, its translucent veins bursting into black mist. The pressure holding the escape pod snapped. Elias slammed his metal fist into the pod's manual launch override. "Go!" he roared. The pod's emergency thrusters ignited, a blinding white flare in the absolute darkness. As the pod tore away from the seafloor, the suction created a vacuum. Elias, still in the heavy exosuit, grabbed the tether line attached to the pod's exterior. He wasn't inside the pod. He was hanging on for dear life as it shot toward the surface like a bullet. 30,000 feet, 20,000 feet, 10,000 feet. The change in pressure was agonizing. The titanium suit began to expand and groan. Elias's vision blurred into red. His lungs felt like they were filled with molten lead. But as he looked down, one last time, he saw the trench. The great sleeper had opened its true eye. It wasn't a glowing light. It was a massive swirling vortex of black oil that stretched for miles. And for a second, Elias didn't feel fear. He felt a strange, cold peace. The ocean didn't hate him. The ocean was simply lonely. The surface of dreams. Splash. The escape pod shattered the surface of the Atlantic, bobbing in the moonlight. The cool, salty night air rushed into the pod's vents. Elias let go of the tether. He floated on his back in the massive, heavy exosuit, staring up at the stars. He had never realized how bright they were. They looked like the bioluminescent lights of the trench, but without the hunger. He fumbled with his helmet and cracked it open. The air was sweet. It was real. System shut down as the exosuit began to fill with water, heavy and tired. Elias felt a hand on his arm. He turned, expecting a monster. But there was no one. Just the reflection of the moon on the waves. He pulled himself onto the top of the floating escape pod and sat there, a lone survivor in a vast dark world. He looked down into the water. Deep, deep down, miles below his feet. He knew they were still there. Miller, Sarah, and the thing that looked like Lily. They were part of the archive now. Elias reached into his pocket and found the small, tattered teddy bear that had been sucked out of the station with him. He dropped it into the water. "Goodbye, Lily," he whispered. As the bear sank into the dark, a single glowing bubble rose to the surface and popped. "Goodbye, Daddy." The silence of the ocean was no longer scary. It was just a story, waiting for the next person to dive deep enough to hear it.